Let me tell you about a case that sounds like something out of a movie. Picture this. It's 1927. You've got four guys, they're armed, they're in a stolen car, and they're about to pull off a big payroll robbery. The cops catch them, they confess to everything, and yet they walk free. This isn't fiction. This is the truly bizarre, real-life story of People v. Rizzo, a case that even today makes us ask a really fundamental question. Where's the line between just planning a crime and actually attempting one?
And that brings us to this just perfect quote from the final court decision. It might be the greatest backhanded compliment in legal history. The court basically says, "Hey, great job, cops. You stopped a bad thing from happening." And then, in the very next breath, they're like, but was what these guys did actually illegal? This quote just perfectly sums up the whole paradox of this case.
So yeah, that's the big question we're going to unpack here. How on earth did this happen? They had the plan, they had the guns, they had the criminal intent. They even admitted to all of it. So how did a jury's guilty verdict get completely tossed out, setting a legal precedent that people would be talking about for almost 100 years?
All right, so to understand the court's wild decision, we have to go right back to the beginning. Let's look at the plan that was hatched by this guy, Charles Rizzo, and his crew on a cold winter night up in the Bronx.
Okay, so the plan itself was pretty straightforward. Charles Rizzo, he knew the target, a payroll agent named Charles Rao. So Rizzo's job was to be the spotter. His three buddies, and listen to this, two of them were carrying loaded guns. They were going to do the actual robbery. The goal? A $1,200 payroll, which was a lot of money back then. They had the stolen car, they had their rolls. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, pretty much everything.
And this is where the story gets kind of funny, honestly. It's the story of the gang that couldn't rob. Because what started as this straightforward crime plot just completely devolved into a total farce. This was no slick criminal operation, it was a genuine comedy of errors.
These guys spent hours driving all over the Bronx in that stolen car, just trying to find their target, Rizzo. They drive to the bank, nope, he's not there. They race to one construction site, then another, but they keep missing him. Of course, all this suspicious zigzagging catches the eye of the police, who start tailing them. Finally, they stop at a building, Rizzo gets nervous and runs inside, and that's it. The police move in and bust the whole crew. And the craziest part? They were arrested just moments before the payroll agent, the guy they were after, finally showed up. They never even saw the guy.
So at this point, you're thinking this is a total slam dunk for the prosecution, right? I mean, the police found two loaded guns. During questioning, every single guy cracks and confesses to the entire robbery plot. So it's really no surprise that a jury hears all this and boom, convicts them of attempted robbery. Case closed. Or was it? Well, as you've probably guessed, it was not. Case closed. On appeal, the entire case gets flipped completely on its head. The conviction was thrown out because of a very fine, almost philosophical legal line. The whole thing came down to how New York defined a criminal attempt back in 1927. The law said you needed an act done with intent and, here's the key word, tending toward the crime. But the court pointed out that tending is a super vague word. Over time, other cases had clarified it to mean that a person's actions have to come dangerously close to actually succeeding. But what in the world does dangerously close really mean?
Okay, so the law draws this super important line between just preparing for a crime and actually attempting it. Think of it like this. If you go out and buy a ski mask and a crowbar to rob a house, that's just preparation. It's remote from the actual crime. But walking up to that same house at midnight with the mask and crowbar in your hand, now you've crossed the line. You're dangerously proximate. That's an attempt. So the huge question for the court was, which side of that line were Rizzo and his gang on?
So this is the million-dollar question, right? How did the court take this idea of dangerous proximity and apply it to this gang's bumbling adventure across the Bronx?
Well, the court's logic was actually brutally simple. The gang never found Rao. They never even laid eyes on the payroll money. And because their intended victim was never even there was zero chance, not just a low chance, but zero chance that the robbery could have actually happened at that moment. The court said their actions were still too remote. Sure, they had the criminal intent, and they had definitely made preparations, but their actions never got close enough to the finish line to legally count as an attempt.
So, okay, that was then. What about now? Because the legal world has changed a lot. And if Rizzo's case happened today, you can bet the ending would be totally different.
See, most modern law uses a totally different test, called the substantial step test. The old test, the dangerous proximity test, was all about looking forward. How close were you to the finish line? The modern test looks backward. It asks, okay, what have you already done that is a major step and strongly proves you were serious about this? And under that new test, oh yeah, driving all over town with loaded guns looking for a robbery victim would absolutely be a substantial step. Today, Rizzo would almost certainly be found guilty.
But wait, there's another massive twist to this whole story. Even if prosecutors today could use that modern substantial step test against Rizzo, they'd run into a huge problem. The evidence itself would probably get thrown out of court.
The police work, the stuff the court called excellent, was, well, it was a product of its time. The initial stop was based on a vague suspicion, not probable cause. The confessions, which were the heart of the case, were only gotten after suspects were beaten with a blackjack and sticks. There were no Miranda rights, of course. That idea didn't even exist yet. And on top of all that, they used each guy's confession against all the others in one big trial, something the Supreme Court later said was unconstitutional. In a modern courtroom, this mountain of evidence would be tossed out in a heartbeat.
And that's what's so fascinating about the story of Charles Rizzo. It leaves us with this huge legal and philosophical question that we still debate today. I mean, these guys were clearly a menace. They had a dangerous plan. But should the law step in and punish them just for the plan? Or does it need to wait until their actions are so close to happening that the danger is real and immediate? The Rizzo case drew a very clear line in the sand, and it's a line that continues to challenge how we think about what it truly means to attempt a crime.